Good afternoon, everyone. I guess coming to you from downtown Red Deer. I'm Tim McAllister. I'm going to be your moderator for this afternoon. I'm a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge, and I've been doing work in biodiversity as it relates to beef cattle production, and also involved with the Livestock Environmental Agricultural Partnership of the FAO and developing metrics for biodiversity with them as well. As we know, biodiversity is becoming increasingly important in terms of assessing the sustainability of our agricultural systems. And so in many ways, carbon or biodiversity could be the new carbon, as we've entitled the symposium for this afternoon. We have three excellent speakers lined up to give some perspectives, not only from biodiversity, but also from ecosystem services and how livestock production can play a role in delivering some of the objectives we have in sustainability. So with that, I think we'll get right into the first speaker. Our first speaker today is Dr. Majid Iravani. Majid is with ABMI, and he's going to give a presentation on beef production's contribution to biodiversity and landscape connectivity. And in the interest of time, I think rather than going through everybody's bio, I just encourage people to go to the site. Everybody's bio is reported there. And Majid, feel free to add in some additional information or key points if you want with regard to your background in the area. So thanks a lot, Majid. Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Slide is on. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tim mentioned, my name is Majid Iravani with Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute. What I'm going to present today is mostly related to beef production, but it has implication for any type of livestock products or any type of agriculture product and agriculture production systems. So a little bit of background. Well, we heard a lot the last 2 days and today about the food security issues and also the performance and efficiency of agriculture production systems, which are quite diverse in Canada. And the reason is that we are seeing more food demand, and also we're seeing more competition over natural resources. And we are facing a lot of environmental challenges, including biodiversity loss and climate change that was explained. And all of this put us in a situation to define targets and commitment basically for environmental friendly supply chain. And one part of the environmental friendly supply chain would be the biodiversity management throughout the entire agriculture production system, which requires a true understanding of the relationship between any agricultural products and biodiversity. And that basically means a consistent and harmonized assessment of risk and opportunities associated with agricultural production practices at multiple spatial scale, on farm and beyond the farm, from local to landscape scale. So with that, a few years ago, we started an initiative to look into beef production and its relationship with biodiversity in the context of Canadian beef production industry. We were looking at a multi-taxa assessment approach, which I will explain today. And the goal was basically to provide information, science-based information, not just about the beneficial, but also about the negative aspect of beef production on biodiversity. So our approach is not just to highlight what is good, but also highlight the entire beef production and what are basically the impact that we see from beef production systems. The ultimate goal, of course, is to incorporate biodiversity into a life cycle impact assessment analysis, as was introduced by a LEAP partnership, as you can see here, in the guideline that was released last year. And if we can do that, then we can basically support the sustainability performance of the industry. That would be based on the benchmark that we provide, and also we can easily support or we can support basically the future development in the beef industry, and also for land use planning, and also for securing necessary financial resources that help to promote biodiversity-friendly beef production practices. So a couple of challenges for biodiversity and beef assessment. So we have two sides of the story. We have beef biodiversity side and we have beef side. So I would like to talk a little bit quickly about these challenges. The first challenge that we face, and you can see on the screen, is that while biodiversity includes a wide range of species and taxonomic groups. And as you can see here from these studies that was done in German grasslands, almost 150 grassland sites, you can see basically there is not no single taxa that can basically predict multi-diversity or all the taxonomic groups. Basically, no single group is correlated strongly with all taxa. Well, there are some, of course, with high, like bryophyte, as you can see here. But in this study specifically, the authors highlighted that basically we need to be careful about selecting the taxonomy group when we do the biodiversity management in a system like grassland. So it's basically a subset of taxa that are accurate and cost-effective means of predicting overall biodiversity. And overall biodiversity means a multi-taxa approach. But that's not the only difficulties that we have here. We have a different response of a species and taxonomy group. This is another study that was based on a meta-analysis of several studies on grazing impact. And as you can easily see here, different taxonomy groups have different response to different grazing intensities. And also the overall biodiversity, basically, the approach that the response from overall biodiversity is not similar to the response from the individual taxonomy group. So this also support a multi-taxa diversity approach for any biodiversity assessment or providing information to support biodiversity-friendly practices in agricultural system. But that's not only the only thing. We also look at different measures of biodiversity, like how many species are present, species niches versus the relative abundance of species. And these two also show, as you can see here, different response to, if we use these two metrics, we see different response of biodiversity to grazing intensity. So, and because of that, basically, there has been a lot of discussion going on about what metrics and diversity of the metrics. What we basically practiced over the last 17 years with the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute is Biodiversity Intactness Index, which basically is a measure of deviation from natural conditions or a reference condition. So under the no human footprint, we expect 100% or 100% intactness, basically 100% intactness, and under the 100% human footprint, we see 0% intactness. So here examples are for two species, one species that we call it increaser, increased by intensifying human footprint, and one species decreased by intensifying human footprint in terms of the populations. And there are two specific examples here basically that shows how intactness better reflects change from natural to human, from human disturbed conditions. We have a introduced species, which is also somehow occurring in Alberta. This is an increaser species. You can see there, compared to the reference conditions before the creation of the human footprint, the population is much higher, specifically around the buildings like feedlots and infrastructure like feedlot and intensive farming systems. But in the other side, with this side, we see a native breeding bird, basically from southern Alberta, that the population has decreased. And its intactness has decreased due to agriculture and other human footprint in southern Alberta. So what we count as biodiversity is really important, and also what we consider as a reference condition is really important, because if we don't, the choice of reference condition is basically defined at how much impact from any practices we can see on biodiversity or different aspect of biodiversity. Also, the other thing that we need to consider about the biodiversity assessment and the complexities around the aspect of the biodiversities are valued differently by different stakeholders. As you can see here, we have stakeholders that take care of different group of species, and those could be from above ground or below ground, from single taxa or multiple taxa. A good example is a species at risk or priority species. Also we can see different scientists, even they look at different species, rare species, common species, and more mobile species compared to less mobile species like plant and so on. So this basically is a challenge when you want to quantify biodiversity as a whole to a single metric. So I wish that we could have something that New Zealand beef and lamb for climate change, that they have CO2 equivalent, the report that just came last year, but basically for biodiversity, we don't. So moving from the biodiversity to the beef, beef is also a complex, the beef systems are complex too, basically. We have different functional units. So when we talk about the beef, of course, we talk about only about the beef production, but alongside beef production, we have natural fiber production. So the functional unit and the complexity around the functional unit is important. And then we have the system boundary, whether we are talking about only about the up to the farm gate or post-processing beef production, for example, in this case. So we are looking at the heterogeneous, multi-layered and fragmented nature of agricultural production systems and food supply changes that is really hard basically to talk about who is responsible for what. And in this case, of course, as you can see here with the beef production, we have different stages and we have different beef production systems, and they rely on different natural or human-made land use and land cover. So when we put this side together, basically, we see kind of a contrasting impact of beef production. And with the contrasting, I mean basically that we see some, what they call it, positive or some negative or some protective aspect and some damage that we see from beef production to biodiversity. This is from the LEAP report, as I shortly explained before. And if you look at the LEAP report, there we have the direct impact of beef production or livestock production on biodiversity. And the one that is more in indirect impact that will be covered in the next presentation today somehow. Today, I will talk more about the direct impact. And if you look at the direct impact, for example, we have the impact of a diversity of extensive and intensive beef production systems in the Canadian context, and what clear aspect for intensive system is land conversion or habitat degradation, which also results to losing connectivity and landscape fragmentations. But from the other side, we have natural grazing land that are maintained for beef production, but beef production practices basically that share a high share of native species and a network of connected habitats. So a contrasting effect. But also we have beef production practices that could be detrimental or beneficial. These are the things that I would like to cover shortly today with some of the analysis that we have done over the last 2 years. The first thing that we talk about is about contribution of beef production to multi-taxa biodiversity. So here, with the case of the province of Alberta, because we have the ABMI data, if you look at the ABMI website, 17 years of the data, very diverse, one of the largest monitoring program in the world, and this basically opportunity enables us to talk about an integrated approach, of which we considered a diversity of different indicators related to livestock indicators, livestock to land use and land cover, biodiversity and biodiversity impact. And of course, our ultimate goal is basically to link all of this to ecosystem services, including the carbon, which is one of the topics from this session, and how changing biodiversity can impact carbon sequestration and carbon sink and source in our ecosystem. So the first thing that we want to do basically in any biodiversity assessment, impact assessment, is that who is responsible for what? So what is the share of beef production in terms of the impact on beef production? And this is one example for beef production with different stages and different systems in Alberta, because we have the most detailed human footprint map of the world in Alberta, basically. So now we are able basically to look at the relevant land use and land covers, including non-food related human footprint, to come with an idea about the extent and about the percentage of the land in each county, in this case here, that was basically impacted or protected by beef production. This is what I call it land use footprint. It's hard basically to do it for the sectors. Within agriculture, it will be much harder to do it for other sectors than agriculture, but this is something that we need to work toward and understand who is responsible for what in our landscape. Okay, in terms of the biodiversity, we use ABMI biodiversity data from more than almost 1,000 species. So we have measurements, then we have predictive habitat models for several species from 6 different taxonomic groups, which are based on the real measurements on the ground, and then the models that are basically taking land cover types in terms of southern Alberta for different range ecosites, or in terms of the human footprints for different human footprint type, as you can see here. These models are highly validated. ABMI has more than 3,000. We use only 1,000 that we make that we were sure that they are behaving well for this analysis. So what we did with this data, basically for Alberta, here I have 2 examples for you from 2 counties. One is a feedlot county, Lethbridge, and the other one is Cypress County, which is basically a cow-calf county. On the graph here, you see the population change of almost 1,000 species, and the species are basically ranked along these violin plots, and each violin, of course, show different sectors. And then we have symbols of averages for different taxonomic groups. So this is what we need basically in biodiversity assessment. We have different stakeholders, so we need a range of response. This is when basically you convert the land. As soon as you convert the land, you expect to see some decrease in biodiversity. For example, when you convert it from grassland to a barley field, you see biodiversity. A lot of biodiversity is lost basically due to this land conversion. But really what we are looking here basically with this graph is the local impact. We don't really take this consideration into a landscape scale, which is important aspect that we want to talk. We want to compare beef production compared to what else is happening across the landscape. So one way that we can take all of these numbers basically, which are based on measurements over the last 15, 17 years and the models that we developed, you can take these measures, these species-specific measures under different beef production stages and systems and for different taxonomic groups, and you combine that with the human footprint of beef production that I just explained you in previous slides, and also looked at the other human footprint across the landscape and the suitability of the habitat that is impacted by beef production, then you can come to a different measure that we call it total regional effect. Of course, for a cow-calf county, basically you don't expect much of the impact of beef production on biodiversity. It's minimal, as you can see here. And the total beef production, of course, in this county is related to cow-calf, so not much impact. But as you move from that to a feedlot county, you start to see the impact of beef production, and the negative impact on population of the species is much higher basically. And a lot of species are concentrated in this case around -10 to -15. So this gives you an idea that, okay, this is the impact of beef production at the regional scale, at the county scale, that you can take it to the land use framework region and to the provincial scale. Now you can compare this with the similar, with other human footprint, like let's say for the transportation, that is always compared with the livestock industry in terms of the greenhouse gas emission. If you have transportation with the same size of human footprint, then we can compare which one has more impact and in what direction on beef production. And these are really important. The key point here is that we have a consistent approach that can work across multiple sectors. And it's not just about highlighting the positive, but also highlighting where we need improvement in future. So when we put all of this basically together, one thing that, I mean, this is a point of the discussion again for the stakeholder. This is just here you can see an average for all the species within each taxonomy groups and their response range and basically the regional impact on those species for the 6 different taxonomy groups. If you aggregate them and average them, that's again one way basically to do it. It would be quite dangerous basically. That's something that needs to be discussed by end users. But if we do that kind of assessment to have a single measurement basically, you can see that it's not a surprise that a lot of less mobile species like plants, mosses, lichens, and even soil biodiversity basically, they're highly impacted, specifically in this corridor between Edmonton and Calgary, where we have a lot of basically of these beef production activities. But this shows us that, again, takes us to this multi-taxo approach that is important when we do any biodiversity impact assessment. But it also highlights that, okay, we need to have a consistent approach and we need to have the tools that work across multiple stages in sectors, subsectors, and within agriculture, and also we can use it to compare with other sectors. Again, we can do that, but this, if we want to take a species agnostic approach, this is one way to do the average and look at the impact on different taxonomy groups and look at the risk and opportunities that we have with the beef production and beef industry, in this case in Alberta. Now, we move from multi-taxo approach, we move to another approach that it's also somehow a species agnostic approach. A lot of studies that have been done with the livestock sector and biodiversity impacts are based on proxies of land cover and land use. And here's another example of proxies of land cover and land use or human footprint data that we have for Alberta. We took a species agnostic approach and we developed a landscape connectivity map for the entire province of Alberta, the publications that you can take a look at later. This is a structural connectivity, which means that it's purely based on the naturalist, degree of the naturalist in different part of the province of Alberta. Our goal was to quantify the contribution of the grasslands or grazing land kept for through practicing extensive beef production systems. And also we wanted to highlight basically that if the land is converted, what we see, what will be in terms of the impact. So basically we have a complex land, we move from a complex landscape. When we start with land conversion, we move from a complex landscape to a more simplified landscape, specifically in higher productivity areas. So this is what has happened in Canadian prairie. So with the human footprint data, we can develop a landscape resistance map, which basically how landscape resists to plant and animal movement across the landscape. And we can come with a measure that we call it current density that basically help us to identify the connectivity routes. In this case, for example, we can even look at this specific bridge here that has an important route for connectivity of these two different patches of the landscape. And so the goal is basically to look at all possible passes that a species can move from point A to point B with the presence of human footprint. So what we did here, we removed all the human footprint from the landscape in Alberta. You can see, well, you expect the current is everywhere, basically, except in the mountain and some lake and some water bodies due to the natural barrier. But if we compare that with the current land use, which is this one, you see that there are certain connectivity routes, and there are areas that the connectivity is already lost. And there are a lot of areas in the southeastern part of the province that we have still native grassland and with the connectivity route. Now, for this exercise, we tried to convert the land basically in the scenarios, started with the class 2 of land suitability rating for Alberta, and then ending up with the class 5. So S2 means only converting S2, S3 means converting S2 plus S3, and S5 at the end means converting S2 to S5. And we wanted to see if we convert this, basically how we can see how the connectivity routes are going to be changed. As you can see here again, as we move from S2 to S5 scenarios, we will lose connectivity in the prairie regions or in the grassland regions. And most of the current is diverted to different part of the province, like in the northern part of the province, specifically if you compare here, and also along the foothill regions. And so we lost a lot of connectivity that is linked to the larger scale connectivity with the Mexico, Canada, or Yellowstone to Yukon connectivities, and all the connectivities that comes through the Northern Great Plains. So these are a good examples that shows that connectivity has implication. This has implication at different scale, connecting or protecting grazing lands. So, and this is another example, just to be very short in the favor of the time. If we go from the natural conditions to current land use, we have lost already a lot of connectivity. But if we look at the different scenarios, basically we can identify different clusters. And one of the clusters is, of course, corridor between Calgary and Edmonton. We will lose a lot of connectivity. We have lost a lot of connectivity, but if we continue with land conversion, we will lose the rest of the connectivity. And also there are areas that we gain and lost, depends on the other areas when we convert the land, and then all the current that we converted to the foothill regions and to the boreal regions. So this kind of information that we have at 100-meter resolution right now can help us not only to understand what is the protective value of the grassland, but also what is the consequences of land conversion related to beef production or any other agricultural product or any other land development in the region. And the last piece, basically, that we basically started, just a very quick example is about like the third piece that is about on-farm activities. This is something that was highlighted in the Living Lab presentation. And I'm really looking forward to see how we can use the data from the Living Lab to look at the on-farm practices. This is really the missing part, that there are a lot of localized studies, but we need to move from the local scale to landscape scale and to the country scale, regional scale to really understand the contribution of different land management practices, or what we call BMPs. But here we did a practice. We looked at the intactness again with the ABMI data, and we looked at 3 different rangeland health conditions. And we wanted to see if we move from an unhealthy condition to a healthy condition, how much improvement we can see across a representative watershed in southwestern Alberta. So basically that could result as a 15% increase in intactness of all these 200 plant species that we investigated here. But of course, plant species are quite diverse. So the potential is there. We can't reach to 100%, but there is a chance basically to do some improvement. But this is just a preliminary results, and we need to move. So to summarize, basically, we have a lot of gap in the data. We need to continue monitoring. The monitoring is not just about the species and habitat. We need to monitor the agricultural landscape in terms of what else is happening in terms of the human footprint across the agricultural landscape and throughout Canada. And we also look into the development of approaches and tools that can be used across multiple sectors. As long as we can't compare one sector or subsector with the other subsector or sector, we can't really start looking into how we can blame people on different sectors, and how we can improve and how we can decrease the risk and increase the opportunities in terms of biodiversity management. So what I presented here today is a collaborative work with several partners and collaborating organizations and supporting organizations, and I would like to thank all of them. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much, Majid, for that excellent presentation. I think it really thoroughly demonstrated the complexity of measuring biodiversity and some of the challenges associated with that. And I think the linkages to connectivity are very interesting as well, particularly if we look at impacts of climate change and the importance of populations to be able to interact with each other to maximize genetic diversity in the hope that they'll be able to adapt to some of the challenges that those species are going to be facing. So with that, I would encourage people to put any questions you have into the question and answer point in Zoom here, and then at the end we're going to have a panelist discussion, and we'll go through those questions and address any other points that people want to raise at that time.